It's been 3 months since the lockdown started, and the silence has become a suffocating presence in my tiny apartment. I live alone, which I used to love. But now, with the world outside eerily quiet and the days blending together, it feels like I'm the last person on Earth. At first, I was productive, turning my home into a sanctuary. But then, the news reports became more alarming, the numbers of the infected growing. The anxiety that crept into my mind like a persistent fog became unbearable. The walls of my apartment seemed to close in on me, and every noise, no matter how small, made my heart race. Then one night, I heard it, a soft knock at my door. It was almost midnight, and I wasn't expecting anyone. Who would be visiting during a lockdown? I froze, straining my ears, thinking it was my imagination. But there it was again, a gentle, insistent tap, tap, tap. I approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. The hallway was dark, and I could see nothing but shadows. My hand trembled as I turned the deadbolt, but something inside me screamed not to open it. Instead, I whispered, "Who's there?" Silence. I waited for a response, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. "Please, I need help." A voice finally whispered from the other side, barely audible. It was a woman's voice, frail and desperate. Against my better judgment, I cracked open the door. The hallway light flickered, casting long, eerie shadows, but there was no one there. "Hello," I called out, but the hallway was empty. The voice had been right there, I was sure of it. I stepped out, looking around, but the corridor was deserted. The air was cold, much colder than it should have been. I shivered and quickly stepped back inside, locking the door behind me. That's when I noticed it. An old, tattered note on the floor. It hadn't been there before I opened the door. With shaking hands, I picked it up. The paper was yellowed, the edges frayed as if it had been passed through many hands. Scrawled in messy handwriting, it read, "Don't trust the voices. It's already inside." My stomach dropped, and I spun around, scanning my apartment. Everything looked the same, but a cold dread washed over me. I checked every room, every closet, under the bed, but found nothing. Yet, the feeling of being watched was overwhelming, as if something unseen was breathing down my neck. The days that followed were a blur of paranoia. The knocks on my door continued every night at the same time, always accompanied by that same desperate voice. But now it was more insistent, pleading for help. Each time, I ignored it, clutching the note tightly in my hand. Sleep became impossible. The shadows in my apartment grew darker, deeper. I began seeing things, flashes of movement in the corners of my eyes, the silhouette of a figure standing in the doorway that vanished when I turned to look. I tried to reach out for help, but my phone had no signal. The internet was down. The city outside was dead silent, as if the world had simply ceased to exist. I was trapped in a nightmare of my own making. One night, the knocking stopped. I thought it was over, that whatever was tormenting me had finally given up. But then, I heard it. A soft, dragging sound coming from the living room. It was as if something heavy was being pulled across the floor. I crept out of bed, every step feeling like I was wading through molasses. The sound grew louder, closer, until I finally saw it. My front door was wide open. Standing just inside the doorway was a woman, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow and black. She smiled at me, a twisted, unnatural grin that sent ice through my veins. "You let me in," she whispered, her voice no longer desperate but cold and mocking. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. She stepped closer, her presence filling the room with a suffocating darkness. I stumbled back, but there was nowhere to go. The walls of my apartment seemed to stretch and warp, closing in on me. The last thing I remember is that twisted smile as she reached out to touch me, her cold fingers grazing my skin. Then, everything went black. I woke up the next morning in my bed, drenched in sweat. The door was closed, and everything seemed normal, but I knew better. The note was still clutched in my hand, but the words had changed. Now it read, "You are not alone. I don't know what's real anymore. I don't know if I ever left that nightmarish place or if I'm still trapped in it, doomed to relive that night over and over again. But I do know one thing: I was never alone. Not during lockdown. Not ever.